to the first lesson of the drum module course of the Zen Records Education project. So check this out what I have here, right? Take a listen. Right, so we have some basic foundations of a track, but what you've probably noticed, what's missing is there's no drums, there's no groove, there's no rhythm so much to this track. The only rhythmic force in it is the 4 on the fuller kick drum, but that's very limited, right? The groove is very one-dimensional, so what we want to do by focusing on the drums aspect of our production is developing groove, right? Making the music move in a specific way, and the way it will move is dependent on how you will make the drums in it, or to better put it, how you will arrange the percussive elements, right? Because drums are generally percussive sounds. We can use any synth that we would make for any other sound, we can use it to make drum sounds, because it's all just waves. They're just shaped in a slightly different way, which makes us perceive them as percussive. And then we call it drums. So let's get started. Since this is the first video, I figured what better place to start than just by synthesizing a few drum sounds to help us grasp the concept a little bit better, and then the content of the future videos will be much more approachable. So let's create a few empty MIDI tracks to start, and let's use the operator synth, which comes with Ableton, for the purpose of this video. Let's go ahead and drop an operator into an empty MIDI track. Now, a drum is some sort of sound, or a percussive sound, is basically some sort of sound which is shaped by an envelope in some way to give it a snappy, plucky feel, right? So even by having just an operator default set to a sine wave, if I just bring the decay and sustain down, we already have a plucky sine wave, almost like a little, it's also like some type of, minimalist tom. Okay, so knowing this, let's actually change the wave of oscillator A to a noise. Let's use noise looped, because noise looped can be tuned. If we press fixed, we can kind of bring the tuning up to a little bit of the higher range. You see, it's already sounding like a hi-hat. What we can do is actually then use the filter, change it to high pass to filter out the low frequencies. Let's bring the cutoff point a little bit down. See, nice sounding hi-hat. We can go for a more like organic behavior of this sound if we, for example, use the LFO and get rid of the pitch routings here and instead send it to the filter. Turn off the retrigger so that the LFO will continue in the background and not trigger with every note. And let's bring the amount a little bit up, slower rate, and now the hi-hat will be playing at a slightly different frequency each time. Makes it a little bit more interesting, One more thing we can do with this is actually go back to the envelope section of oscillator A and turn on the loop function of the envelope. Okay? This will allow us to create specific type of like flams or playful like triggering of the hi-hat dependent on the time position and where you put the decay and the sustain parameters. Notice what happens when I hold note. Right? The reason this is happening is because the envelope is looping. So as you hold the note, it will loop based on what settings you set for the time and decay. Cool. Okay, let's go ahead and create an empty MIDI clip and put some basic hi-hat arrangement, like so. I basically put them in between each kick. This is the most like standard techno housey trancey arrangement of this type of sound. Check it. Let's bring the filter up a bit. Cool. Let's maybe make the envelope here a little bit more snappy, bringing the decay down. Okay, that's cool. I will take this clip and put it here so that it comes in halfway through this first section. We're going to create a evolving drum dialogue. Okay, so let's go for the snare now. So to understand the snare, it's basically the second strongest driving force of the rhythm in your track. The first one being the kick. So we can actually approach the snare as that, just a sound that is supposed to behave the way a snare would. It's supposed to complement the kick, give it an additional burst of power every now and then, right? Or somewhere like position itself in relationship to the kick. So we can actually use any sound really, as long as it's heavier than all our other drum sounds and behaves the way a snare would, right? You can experiment. For the purpose of this video, though, let's try to synthesize a very standard snare as best as we can. Like let's actually try to get it to sound like a snare. So a snare generally should have a initial click transient, like hitting the snare, and a body of sound that stays a few milliseconds after, usually a type of noise. So we can do this also in operator. Let's go ahead and you change the algorithm here to subtractive so that these oscillators don't modulate each other. Let's keep the first one as a sine wave, and let's put on the pitch envelope, right? Let's bring it all the way up and bring the envelope decay and sustain down, as well as the end position. You should get a sound that resembles almost a kick, basically just a sine wave sweep down. This will be this will be the strength of our snare. Let's bring it shorter a bit. Just the first click is what we need. And now let's use the second oscillator. Let's change the wave to a noise. And this will be our body. Let's go into the amp envelope and bring the attack up. We want it actually to come in a little bit after the first transient. And then let's bring the decay and sustain down as well. Bring the release up a bit, and we have, whoops, let's bring the level of the noise up. Mess around with these parameter settings until you get the perfect, like, clicky, noisy sound. This is like okay for me. Let's use this. We'll know how it sounds once we put it with the rest of the track. So I'm going to create a basic snare arrangement here, which is putting it on every other kick. This has been the standard dance floor arrangement that you're free to experiment with. But for the purpose of this video, let's keep it as basic as possible, right? So let's listen to what this drum dialogue sounds like. Nice, right? What else to expect? It's like a no-brainer basically. You just have a light percussive sound on a smaller scale more frequently. Notice that it's double the time more frequently than the snare. It's like a fractal basically. If you were to go for the full groove, you would most likely want to create even thinner hi-hats. Let's actually duplicate this operator, bring it down here. Let's go ahead and copy this MIDI clip over to this new MIDI track. And here we, just like with the snare, we multiply it by 2. Have it twice as frequently. So between each small hat, between each of the hats, we'll have a smaller hat playing, right? So let's duplicate this. And for this to work, we actually should take the first hat and bring the decay up. It needs to actually now behave more as an open hat. Yes, like so. And then this very, very thin one, this has to be very, very thin, very light, and very quick. Like so. So let's actually move this over here and notice how this drum pattern will evolve as this new segment comes in. This would basically be considered the peak of our I guess the dancing part of our track, if we want to approach it that way. This would be considered the peak. There's no, you can of course keep going in and filling in these smaller blanks, but then it can just become like noise. This is considered by most standards the full drum, basic full blast, right? And this goes for any BPM you're working with, anything you're doing. Okay, so one more thing we can do with this is play around with the arrangement a bit. We could maybe use a beat repeat and put it on the snare actually. And a nice trick to do is have the sound sometimes play in a different place than, or play in an additional place outside of its like MIDI notes. So the beat repeat can be a nice tool for this. If you, for example, bring the grid down to the smaller divisions up here and change this to insert, and now let's find we have to find the right position of the offset to actually catch the snare sound and repeat it. This one. So having this here, notice that the snare will sometimes repeat. And listen to how this sounds. Right? Lastly, we can put up the filter to have that repeater part a little bit cut off in certain frequencies, as to not, you know, overcrowd the space. Okay, so last but not least, let's make one more drum sound, but play around a little bit with different timbres and have it even double up as a melody. We can do that. So let's load up one more operator and let's play around with some settings here. I'm going to bring in the FM of these additional oscillators and tune them higher in the octaves to get a nice bell sound like this, but I will also modify the envelope parameters of all the oscillators. You know, and find some nice melody going. Let's also position this somewhere a little bit different than the other sounds. Let's use a reverb, change the quality to high, bring the decay time up, and maybe the cutoff diffusion here. Cool, we have a nice bell sound. Let's actually find a nice note for it. And find a nice place for it. How about here? pretty much it. Now we have some basic dialogue happening of drum sounds here. Nice, so that concludes our first lesson. Hopefully now we understand that drum sounds can be made out of anything as long as the shape is percussive, right? So tune into the next videos where we will explore at increasing levels of depth these concepts. Till the next one, peace out.